Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be tackling something that's been generating a ton of buzz lately, and that is the Great Reset.
A lot of buzz around that one.
We've got a whole stack of sources here, articles, research reports, even some historical deep dives, and our mission is to help you kind of cut through the noise.
Yeah.
Figure out what's really going on.
Still it down to
Yeah.
good stuff.
Now, quick disclaimer before we get started.
Yeah.
We are not here to endorse any particular viewpoint.
Right.
Our goal is to give you the information, the different perspectives,
Lay it all out.
so you can form your own conclusions.
Absolutely.
So with that out of the way, let's just jump right in.
Let's do it.
One of the things that I think is so interesting about this whole idea of the Great Reset is that it's not like some brand new idea.
Right.
It's not like something that just popped up overnight.
It's got some deep roots.
It really does.
Yeah.
So where does this concept actually come from?
Well, you can trace some of the threads back to the Trilateral Commission, which was formed way back in the 70s.
Okay.
And they were this group that was kind of worried about America's influence, declining on the world stage. And they thought that like the U.S., Europe, and Japan should kind of team up to manage global affairs.
Okay. Interesting.
So that's one piece of it.
Okay.
Another name that you'll hear a lot when you're kind of digging into the Great Reset is a guy named Patrick Wood.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that name.
He's been studying this concept of technocracy for decades.
Okay.
And his analysis is where it gets really interesting.
Okay. I've heard that term technocracy thrown around, but I'll admit I'm a little fuzzy on what it actually means.
Yeah, so technocracy is basically the idea that society should be run by like technical experts.
Okay.
So engineers, scientists, people with like specialized knowledge instead of elected politicians.
Okay. Interesting.
And Wood connects this idea back to groups like the Trilateral Commission
Mm-hmm.
and even to the World Economic Forum, which we're going to talk about in a sec.
Okay.
And he argues that there's like this continuous push from certain elites to kind of manage society through technology.
Okay.
This is a very interesting concept.
It is. So let's fast forward to today then.
Okay.
And we've got Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum,
Right.
who's kind of become the face of this whole Great Reset movement.
Mm-hmm.
So what is his vision?
Well, so Schwab has been pushing these ideas about the Fourth Industrial Revolution for a while now.
Okay.
Stakeholder capitalism, the need for global governance,
Right.
all these things. And he argues that the rapid advancements in technology like AI, biotechnology, all that stuff,
It's changing fast.
it's transforming our world in such a fundamental way that we need like a new system to manage it all.
Okay. So he's saying that like the old ways,
The old ways aren't going to cut it.
they're not going to work anymore.
Nope.
Okay.
So we need a new system
Got it.
to manage all of this rapid advancement.
Okay. And what exactly does that new system look like?
Well, that's where it gets a little bit controversial because he believes that like the old model of capitalism where the focus is just on profits for shareholders is not sustainable.
Okay.
He wants to move towards something called stakeholder capitalism,
Okay.
where businesses consider a broader range of interests, so not just the shareholders, but also like employees, customers, the environment, society as a whole.
Right. Okay. So it's kind of like taking a more holistic view.
Exactly.
Okay. But I imagine there are some people who push back against that idea.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What are some of their concerns?
Well, the critics argue that stakeholder capitalism is basically just a way to give more power to corporations and like these big international organizations
Okay.
at the expense of individual rights and free markets.
Okay. So there's kind of that tension there
Yeah, huge tension.
between like the individual and
And these bigger entities.
these bigger forces.
Exactly. So there's a lot of debate about like, whose interests are really being served here.
Right. Who benefits
Exactly.
from this new system?
Yep.
Okay. And that's where Yuval Noah Harari comes in, right?
Yes. He is a fascinating guy.
He's a frequent speaker at the World Economic Forum, and his ideas are kind of mind-blowing,
They really are.
to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about this idea that we're on the verge of this new era where data might become more valuable than human labor.
Right. Like, think about that.
Yeah.
Are data more valuable than our actual work?
Wow.
Yeah.
And he even talks about the potential for AI and bioengineering to like alter what it means to be human.
Yeah, that's where it gets a little freaky.
It really does.
Right.
So how do we balance like this incredible technological advancement with human dignity and autonomy?
That's the million-dollar question,
It is.
right? Because if these technologies really do have the power to reshape humanity,
Right.
who gets to control them?
Right.
Who decides what the future looks like?
Yeah.
That's the big concern.
It is, and that brings us back to those concerns about technocracy.
Right.
Right? And the potential for just this small group of elites to exert all this influence.
A huge amount of influence on our lives.
On our lives. Okay, so we've kind of dug into the history,
Yeah.
the big ideas behind the Great Reset.
The theoretical.
But now I want to get into like the practical.
Okay, let's do it.
How does this actually affect me?
Right. The rubber meets the road.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the areas where we see this playing out is this push for digital control.
Yeah.
We see this in the calls for digital identity systems, vaccine passports, central bank digital currencies, even social credit scores.
Yeah, you remember what happened in Canada last year?
Oh, yeah.
The government freezing the bank accounts of those trucker convoy protesters?
Yeah, that was a huge deal.
That was a big red flag for a lot of people.
It really was.
Because it showed how these digital tools can be used to silence dissent,
Right.
even in a supposedly democratic country.
Exactly.
So the potential consequences of this kind of digital control are pretty alarming
They are.
when you really think about it.
Yeah.
Like, imagine a world where your access to essential services, like banking, healthcare, travel, is all controlled by a digital system.
Okay.
And that system is tied to your identity, your vaccination status,
Right.
and potentially even like a social credit score.
Right, like they have in China.
Exactly like they have in China.
That is a scary thought.
It is a scary thought.
It is.
It's like this digital leash
Yeah.
that they can kind of use to control us.
Right, and it's interesting because you mentioned China,
Yeah.
but we're seeing these trends emerge in other countries too,
We are,
even in the West.
even in the West.
So it's not just like this far-off thing.
Right. It's not some distant dystopian future.
Well, happening now.
It's happening right now.
Okay, so that's digital control. Let's move on to another topic that I think is generating a lot of anxiety, and that is the future of food. What are some of the concerns here?
So there are concerns about food security, corporate control over food production, and this push for a planetary health diet. That significantly reduces meat consumption.
Okay, so like less meat, more plant-based stuff.
Exactly. More bugs.
Bugs.
Yeah.
Okay, we've seen like that string of fires and accidents at food processing plants,
Yeah, a lot of people talking about that.
which has definitely fueled some of those anxieties. And then you've got Bill Gates, who's now the largest owner of farmland in the United States.
Yeah, he's buying up all the farms.
So that's got a lot of people worried about who controls our food supply
Yeah.
and what we'll be eating in the future.
Right. What's on our plate
Yeah.
is Bill Gates controlling that.
Okay, so there's definitely this push
There is
to reshape our food systems.
big time.
Okay, and it's generating a lot of speculation.
A lot of conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories. And I think it's important to point out that while we should be, cautious and critical,
Right.
we shouldn't just jump to conclusions.
Absolutely.
But I do think these incidents raise questions
Legitimate questions.
about the vulnerability of our food supply chains.
For sure.
Okay, what about the push for lab-grown meat and insects
Yeah.
as alternative protein sources?
So that's another big piece of this puzzle.
Okay.
These are often presented as solutions to the environmental impact of traditional agriculture.
Right, makes sense.
But there are also concerns about the economic incentives driving these developments. So will these novel foods really benefit everyone?
Right.
Or will they just further enrich already powerful corporations?
Okay, so again, it's like
That power dynamic.
Yeah.
Who benefits?
Who benefits? Exactly. And I think there is this disconnect
Huge disconnect.
between the agendas being pushed by these global elites and the realities of everyday people,
Yeah.
right?
The people on the ground.
The people on the ground.
Exactly.
And I think that disconnect is fueling a lot of the pushback.
It's fueling a lot of the anger.
The anger.
Yeah, the resistance.
The resistance against the Great Reset.
Absolutely. And that resistance is one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole conversation.
It is. We're going to dive into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait. It's really interesting because that resistance to the Great Reset, it's not just coming from like one side of the political spectrum.
Okay.
We're seeing people on both the left and the right pushing back against what they see as kind of an authoritarian power grab.
So it's less about like traditional left versus right
Right. It's not about that.
And more about
It's about individual freedom.
individual freedom
It's
versus
a centralized control.
centralized control. Okay.
Exactly. And there's this growing awareness that the same tools of surveillance and control that can be used to target one group
Right.
can easily be turned on another.
Of course.
And people are kind of waking up to that reality.
They are. So what are some of the specific concerns that are uniting people across these traditional divides?
Well, there's a lot of pushback against things like vaccine mandates, lockdowns,
Mm.
other policies that are perceived as kind of infringements on individual liberties.
Right.
People are concerned about the erosion of privacy, the expansion of government power, and the potential for these trends to create a society where dissent is silenced and those who don't conform are punished.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that is a scary thought.
It is a scary thought.
It is. We're also seeing the rise of alternative media outlets and independent voices
Yes.
who are challenging the mainstream narrative.
Absolutely. And that's so crucial, especially now in this era of information overload and the potential for censorship.
It is.
We need more voices.
We do.
More perspectives.
New perspective.
It's more important than ever to seek out diverse perspectives and think critically about the information that we're being fed.
Right.
We can't just passively consume whatever's put in front of us.
Right. And speaking of narratives,
Yes.
I think it's important to understand how these global elites are trying to sell their vision for the future.
Yeah, they're very good at that.
They are masters of using language, imagery, emotion
Propaganda.
to manipulate public perception.
Exactly.
It's propaganda. Take Schwab's concept of stakeholder capitalism, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's presented as this more ethical and sustainable form of capitalism.
Right. It sounds good on the surface.
It does.
Right.
But critics argue that it's just a way to kind of reframe the role of government and business, giving more power to corporations
Right.
and international organizations.
Those big entities again.
While sidelining individual rights and free markets.
Exactly.
So it's like they're trying to repackage these potentially radical ideas in a way that sounds appealing.
Right, make it palatable.
Even beneficial.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they use a lot of fear and hope to get people on board with their agenda.
Right.
Fear of climate change, fear of pandemics, fear of economic collapse, and then hope for a better future, a more sustainable world, a more equitable society.
Right.
So they play on those emotions
You do.
to kind of bypass critical thinking and get people to accept their solutions without questioning the underlying assumptions.
Right, because when you're afraid, you're not thinking clearly.
Exactly. You're not thinking critically.
Right.
You're just reacting
You're reacting.
to that fear.
Okay, and that's when you're vulnerable to manipulation.
Exactly.
Right.
And they're masters of that.
They are, and it's a classic propaganda technique.
It is a classic technique.
Remember Greta Thunberg?
Oh, yeah.
She became this global icon for the climate change movement, and she was incredibly effective at tapping into that sense of urgency and moral outrage.
She was.
Right. But her message was often simplistic and emotionally driven,
Right.
which didn't leave much room for nuanced debate or critical analysis.
Exactly. And that's the problem.
It is.
When you shut down debate, when you silence dissenting voices, you're not getting the full picture.
Right. You're only getting one side of the story.
Exactly. And that's dangerous.
It is. It's a reminder that even well-intentioned movements can be hijacked and manipulated
Absolutely.
to serve the interests of those in power.
It happens all the time.
It does. So it's crucial to be aware of these tactics and to develop the skills to critically analyze the narratives that we're being bombarded with.
Yes, we need to be media literate.
We do.
We need to be able to deconstruct these narratives and see them for what they are.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier that I think is particularly concerning.
Yeah.
And that's this idea of a digital gulag.
Yeah.
It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel.
It does.
But the more I learn about these technologies and how they're being implemented, the more worried I get.
Yeah, it's a chilling concept. And it's not as far-fetched as it might seem.
Right.
We already see governments using digital tools to track, monitor, and control their citizens. And with the push for digital identity systems, vaccine passports, central bank digital currencies,
Right.
the potential for this type of control to expand is significant.
It is. You mentioned China's social credit system earlier, where your access to services and even your social standing can be determined by an algorithm.
Yeah, an algorithm that tracks your behavior.
That's terrifying.
It is terrifying. And it's not just China.
Right.
We're seeing similar trends in other countries, including the West.
remember what happened in Canada with the trucker convoy protests?
Oh, yeah.
The government froze the bank accounts of protesters,
Just like that.
which was a blatant demonstration of how these digital tools can be used to silence dissent and target those who challenge the status quo.
And that was a huge wake-up call for a lot of people.
It was. A lot of people were like, wait a minute, this
Yeah.
is happening here.
This could happen to me.
It could happen to me.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that we need to be incredibly cautious about how these technologies are implemented.
Right.
What might seem like a convenient way to manage identity or track health data can quickly turn into a tool of oppression.
Absolutely. There's a lot of talk about using blockchain technology for things like digital identity and vaccine passports. On the surface, blockchain seems like a secure and transparent solution.
Right.
But I've also heard concerns about the permanence of data on a blockchain.
Right. Once it's there, it's there.
It's there forever.
Forever.
So if there's a mistake or a disagreement about your information,
We're stuck with it.
you're stuck with it.
And that's a huge concern.
It is. Imagine being denied access to healthcare or financial services
Right.
because of an error or a dispute about your data on a blockchain.
And that's a very real possibility.
It is. It seems like we're handing over an enormous amount of power to these systems.
We are.
Without fully understanding the potential consequences.
And that's the problem.
It is.
We're rushing into this without really thinking about the long-term implications.
Right, and that's why it's so important to have these conversations,
Absolutely.
to raise awareness and to push back against the uncritical adoption of these technologies.
We need to be having these conversations.
We do. Okay, so we've painted a pretty bleak picture here.
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
But is there any reason to be optimistic?
Oh, I'm very optimistic. I am.
I love that you're optimistic. It's easy to get caught up in all the doom and gloom.
It is.
But we humans have a knack for finding ways to overcome challenges, right?
We do. We've been through a lot
We have.
throughout history, and we've always come out the other side.
That's true.
And I think the fact we're having this conversation, that people are aware of these issues and they're actively discussing them, that's a sign of hope in itself.
It is. Awareness is definitely the first step towards change.
Absolutely.
But knowing all this, where do we go from here?
Okay, so we can't just bury our heads in the sand and pretend everything is fine.
Right.
We need to stay informed,
Okay.
educate ourselves about these complex issues, and most importantly, think critically.
Okay.
Don't just accept the narratives that you're given.
Question everything.
Question everything.
Okay.
Do your own research.
So it's about becoming informed citizens, not passive consumers of information.
Exactly. The future isn't something that just happens to us. We have the power to shape it through our choices and our actions.
So what are some practical steps people can take to kind of push back against this agenda and protect their freedoms?
Well, one thing we can do is support organizations that are fighting for digital privacy and freedom of speech.
Okay.
There are groups out there doing incredible work to raise awareness and challenge policies that erode our liberties.
And we can be more mindful of our own digital footprint, right?
Absolutely.
Taking steps to protect our privacy online.
Yes. Use privacy-focused browsers and search engines. Limit the amount of personal information that you share online.
Right.
And be aware of the data that's being collected about you.
It's everywhere.
These small steps can make a big difference.
They can. What about engaging in the political process?
Oh, that's huge.
Voting for candidates who support our values. Contacting our elected officials to make our voices heard.
Absolutely. We need to hold our leaders accountable.
Yes.
And make sure that they're representing our interests.
Right. Not just the interests of powerful corporations.
Or not just the corporation.
We're global institutions.
Exactly.
Okay. So it sounds like it all boils down to being informed. Engaged. And proactive.
Proactive, yes.
Not letting fear paralyze us.
Right.
But channeling it into constructive action.
That's exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this. There's a growing movement of people who are concerned about these issues.
That's good to hear.
And they're actively working to create a better future.
It's easy to feel powerless.
I know.
When you're up against these massive global forces. But collective action can make a real difference.
I absolutely can. Those global elites, they may have vast resources and influence.
They do.
They do, but they can't control everything.
Right.
They can't control our thoughts.
Our beliefs.
Our beliefs, our connections with each other.
And they can't stop us from speaking out.
No,
sharing information.
Keep sharing.
And organizing to protect our freedoms.
That's right.
This has been an intense deep dive.
It has.
But I think we've emerged with a clearer understanding of what the Great Reset is really about.
We have more clarity.
More clarity.
For sure.
It's not just some fringe conspiracy theory.
Right. It's not just a bunch of crazy talk.
It's a set of ideas and agendas that are being actively implemented and debated all around us.
That's real.
It is.
It's happening.
And the most important takeaway is that we have a choice.
We always have a choice.
We can passively accept the future that's being presented to us.
The future that they want for us.
Or we can actively engage in shaping a future that aligns with our values and aspirations.
That's the key right there.
It is well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Great Reset.
It's been a pleasure.
It has been. We hope you found it insightful and empowering.
Keep those questions coming.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.
We'll see you next time.